This is Lesson 5, Part 5, The Veterinary Role in the Grief Journey. As a pet loss professional, I am often asked what the correct thing to say is when you are dealing with a pet owner who has lost or is experiencing loss of a pet. I don't have an answer to this question because sometimes not saying anything at all is the appropriate thing to say. We don't have a script written out for us of appropriate comments you can make during a loss experience. And being able to communicate with pet owners who are experiencing loss comes with practice. One of the things that I find a little bit odd when we work in the veterinary hospital is that we receive thank you cards all the time. The weird thing is that the majority of these thank you cards are for thanking us on how the loss experience was handled. And a lot of times the thank you cards that we get are from the clients who I've felt like I've not been very helpful to. I've stood in the exam room, I've listened to them tell me stories about their pet, and I mostly didn't say anything at all. And a lot of these pet owners, I've walked out of the room feeling like I wasn't very supportive because I didn't have the right thing to say. But what I have found is that pet owners really truly appreciate your genuine presence. If you can be in the room with them, even if you're not saying anything, being compassionate enough to push that Kleenex box towards them or put your arm around them when you recognize that they need personal support, I think that those things are pretty big in supporting our pet owners. So I've found that those thank you cards sometimes come from the pet owners that I've not had to say anything to, which further instills in my mind that sometimes there are no right words. And I've said that to pet owners too. I've said, gosh, I'm really sorry, I just have no words for how awful this must be for you. We really kind of just need to make sure that we are having really good body language, that we are being very empathetic, and that we can put ourselves in the pet owner's shoes to be able to experience those emotions with them. So there isn't really a necessarily right or wrong thing to say when we're helping our pet owners get through pet loss and grief. When I first started working in this field, when we were talking about pet loss, we referred to grief as the grief process, which sounds very technical. We've kind of moved away from that terminology, and we are now calling pet loss and grief a grief journey, because it is. Just like we travel through life, we travel through work, we also travel through loss and the emotions that go with that. And grief is different for every person. No person experiences grief the same way. We could have two people who both lose a dog, and one might be horribly traumatized by that loss, and the other person might have been able to anticipate that loss and prepare for that loss. So it depends on the relationship and how the loss occurred, how profound that effect is going to be on the individual person. And it's important to remember that grief is individual. We could have 5 members of a family, and all 5 of them experience grief differently. Grief doesn't start at the moment that we have the loss occurring. We can have what is called anticipatory grief. Anticipatory grief starts at the moment that we realize loss is going to happen. So when a pet owner is receiving a terminal diagnosis, even if we say, oh, your pet can live with this for a few years even, that pet owner is starting to experience the sadness of that loss. They have a longer time that they should be able to plan for that loss and prepare for that loss. So their emotions tend to be a little bit more subdued than somebody who has an unexpected loss. But anticipatory grief is huge in the grief process, and it can go on for years, months, weeks, whatever duration of time that anticipation is felt for. As veterinary professionals, we need to recognize this. Sometimes pet owners start experiencing anticipatory grief when they first get a new puppy or kitten after a geriatric pet has died. They get this new puppy and kitten, they're excited to have it in the house, but it's a reminder that they're replacing, for lack of a better word, that relationship that they lost when they lost the initial pet. So anticipatory grief can start from the moment that they have a new pet. It's our job as veterinary professionals to recognize this in our pet owners and support them through that and let them know that we understand. The unanticipated losses tend to be really very difficult. One of the examples of this is when we have cats who have saddle thrombus. Saddle thrombus is a life-threatening situation where a cat has a blood clot in their spinal column and they end up becoming paralyzed. So a pet owner is at work expecting to come home, see their cat acting normally, and it looks to the pet owner like the cat broke its pelvis or one of the hip joints, because they're dragging their rear legs, and they're howling because it's extremely painful. A pet owner in this situation expects to come to the animal hospital with a cat who they think might go home in a cast. But actually, the treatment for this is not very successful, although there are treatments available. Most of these pet owners end up having to euthanize their animal when they bring it to the vet. So that can be extremely traumatic, to think that you have a cat who just simply has a broken leg or a broken pelvis, and to not go home with your pet at all because it was a terminal situation. Those unanticipated losses can be very emotionally trying for pet owners. An animal who's been hit by a car, an animal who's been in a dog fight with severe wounds. These are unexpected losses that the pet owners did not have time to anticipate or plan, and their emotions tend to be very, very drastic when we're dealing with them in the animal hospital. Here we see the common emotions of grief that people can experience when they are going through a loss experience. We used to think that people would go through these emotions in this order that you see on the screen here. But what we have found is that not all people experience these emotions in this order. Not all people experience all of these emotions. They might only experience 2 or 3 or 5 of them. And they can go back and revisit emotions. So they might go through the denial, the bargaining, and the anger phases of grief, but then they might go back to the denial phase, or they might skip down to a loneliness period, but then go back to a guilty period. So these emotions can occur in any order. They can be revisited, and they don't have to occur. What dictates which emotions are experienced is the type of loss that is experienced. So again, it's important to remember that loss is very personal. Oftentimes you will hear pet owners tell you that they are seeking closure, or they'll tell you, oh, I got rid of the food bowls, I just needed closure. Or I made a donation to an animal shelter, it gave me closure. The thing that I am concerned about when I hear people telling me that they're looking for closure is that closure is very ambiguous. Closure does not turn off emotion, it does not stop grief. And I think that when people are telling us that they're looking for closure, is that that's actually what they're looking for. Is they're looking for something that stops these emotions that hurt. They truly hurt when they're going through a loss. As veterinary professionals, it's important that we know our limitations and support. We are not licensed therapists. It's our job to support through general pet loss, but when we have pet owners who are really getting hung up in certain emotions, like guilt is a big one. Guilt can be debilitating. When we have pet owners who are just trapped in this cycle of trying to find closure but never really having a resolution to the emotions that they're trying to eliminate, then it might be time to seek support from a pet loss professional. We have pet loss professional resources available to us. Make sure that you're aware the clinics that you work in should have lists of resources, and if they don't, take the initiative to maybe find out where those resources are. Being able to find pet loss companions, pet loss therapists, and pet loss support groups are going to be hugely helpful for our pet owners who are going through these grief emotions. In addition to the veterinary care that we provide, we also provide pet owner support, and this is through every circumstance that we handle our pet owners, whether it be vaccines or a nail trim, a spay-neuter, or a grief and loss situation. It's important that we are able to recognize the emotions of our pet owners and acknowledge that they are experiencing loss. Active listening is going to be a good sign that we are being compassionate and empathetic towards our pet owners. Offering non-judgmental support, I can tell you firsthand that sometimes it's very hard to be standing in an exam room with a pet owner whom you have provided all sorts of educational information so that they can make an appropriate medical decision, but then they don't follow our recommendations. It can be very frustrating, but our job as veterinary professionals is to support the decisions that our pet owners do make. We can provide information so that they can have the ability to make informed decisions, but that doesn't always mean that they do. So regardless of what decision that they make, As long as it is moral and ethical, I have to remind myself that we need to make sure that we are offering non-judgmental support for our pet owners. That care needs to continue through the year of firsts without their pet. So when a pet is lost, these pet owners are going to go through a Christmas without their first Christmas without their pet, their first birthday without their pet, their first Valentine's Day without their pet. These year of firsts is going to be tragic for them, and the rest of society isn't going to remember that they lost a pet and that these holidays or experiences might be difficult for them. But veterinary professionals have the ability to make these a little bit easier and to just remind the pet owner that we're still thinking of them. Send a birthday card on the pet's birthday. Hey, we know this must be a really difficult day for you. Buffy's birthday. We're still thinking of you. When we let our pet owners know that we're still actively involved in the grieving process, that will encourage them to come back to us, and that's what we want. If they get another pet, we want to provide continued care for our pet owner families. And we need to make sure that we're being conscious of compassion fatigue in ourselves, which we will talk about in a separate lesson.